Okay, so this is lesson 4, which is obviously a continuation of last week, which is lesson 3. And last week we were meditating on this concept of the 2 lines of life, okay? And so this is all part of the block in the program called Gnostic psychology, okay? Because as we said, the whole purpose, or as we said last week, if you want to change your life, you have to begin to change yourself. In order to change yourself, you have to know what it is that you have to change, which implies looking inside and studying yourself, right? And so that's what we call self-gnosis or self-knowledge, to go inside and find that enlightenment about yourself, and that will begin to give you wisdom about not only yourself but also the universe, right? This is why psychologists basically can help us so much, because they're able to know their mind so well, how the mind works, that then they're actually able to help people, right? So in the same way, when one starts a spiritual path, one goes into psychology, even though back then we didn't call it psychology. One begins to know himself or herself in depth, and then it is those people that were able to know themselves very well that were able to then lead and teach others, right? Like Jesus, like the Buddha, whoever, right? Okay, so taking on from last week's lecture, we have this lecture called Need and Greed. Okay, so it's a psychological or philosophical reflection, okay, about an important concept about our lives, which is that since taking on from last week, that we attract the various circumstances of our lives are attracted by our level of being. So what's in your mind, what's in your heart, right? And so, unfortunately, we have been led to believe that happiness is the result of external things, right? JC,
Hey guys.
welcome. How are you? Oh, I forgot you're still on that.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, man. It's good to see you. We'll see you in a bit.
Yeah, alright. Switch. Yes.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
All right. So, I think one of the things that we all have in common is that we're all trying to find happiness. We're all trying to find that, whatever happiness means to you, right? But usually, according to Matthew Ricard, which is considered the happiest man in the world by science, which he's a Buddhist monk that he was a scientist and then gave up his whole life in science and went into a monastery to meditate in the Himalayas and stuff. And now they say that he became the happiest man alive, right? And so he says happiness is a state of contentment and well-being, okay, or something along those lines. Okay, it's very hard to define happiness, but I think we can all agree that we're all searching for happiness. And there are certain activities that make us feel good for a moment while we're engaged in those activities, and then when we're not, then we're not as happy, right? And so, in the esoteric studies, we say that obviously happiness is not something that you have to search for. Happiness is a state of being, okay? That it is always within you, and it is your natural or your essential nature. But you throw yourself out of that state, okay? We allow ourselves to step away from that state because of the various circumstances of life, okay? And so that's the foundation, and this is why I love to start with this quote by Eckhart Tolle. He says, "Those who have not found their true wealth, which is the radiant joy of being and the deep unshakable peace that comes with it, are beggars, even if they have great material wealth. They are looking outside for scraps of pleasure or fulfillment, for validation, security, or love, while they have a treasure within that not only includes all of those things, but is infinitely greater than anything the world can offer. Right? And so basically Eckhart Tolle is saying what the Buddha is saying, happiness comes from within. Right? You don't need external things to be happy. Right? And unfortunately, this country is a great example of that, because even though it is, not going to say the greatest country in the world, the number one country in the world, but it definitely is one of the most important countries in the world. And I think we can all agree that it is a country in which where people have most access to material goods than in other parts of the world. Okay? Yet, people have more access to what we can call wealth, material things, but contradictory, we find ourselves being the most depressed country in the world. Right? We lead the world. That's one of the things that we lead the world lately, unfortunately, is in depression. So, this so-called American dream that they have told us, right? That it's when you get the American dream, when you achieve the American dream, you're going to be happy, right? It's kind of a false propaganda that they gave us, because really, the circumstances of your life can help you, right, to a certain extent, but they'll never make you completely happy, right? And we know that there are countries around the world in which people are very poor and they're very happy. There's a very good documentary about it. It's called Happy. It's on Netflix, right? They do a very good research in this whole aspect. So in this class, we begin to explore this concept of happiness and the search for happiness, right? Because even though we are all looking for happiness, the problem is that we're going about it in the wrong way. And instead of finding happiness, what we're finding is actually the opposite of happiness, right? And so let me just give you an interesting study that they did, in which they took two kinds of people. They say that there are two kinds of people. Okay, those who have so-called intrinsic goals, and the other group of people that have extrinsic goals. Okay, so the group or the people that have intrinsic goals, they have as their main priorities these three aspects, which is personal growth. They're concerned, they want to grow, they have that personal growth yearning. They yearn to have good social relations, and they also have something called a community feeling. That state of being, to want to be part in the community, in a group, that you are part of something, right? And you play a role in that. I mean, after all, we are social beings, right? And so there is a group of people that they focus more on this, right? Personal growth, having good social relationships, and giving back to the community, being engaged with others, allowing others to grow as they grow, okay? And then there is another group of people whose main priorities are money, self-image, and social status, okay? Because and I think we all probably fall under both, right? We all have both of those. And here's what I'm going to propose, to propose, is that most of us have been told that these kinds of things are going to bring us happiness, okay? But what they don't tell us is that, first of all, that's not true. And the second aspect is that instead of focusing here, one should focus over here. And once you focus over here and you start to grow, you will attract this, right? So it's almost as if we're like trying to skip this and go straight for the jackpot, right? And so they found out that most of the people that are on this side of the equation, they found these people to have higher levels of depression, higher levels of anxiety, stress, and low levels of vitality. They seem to be more tired, and they report being less satisfied with their lives. So that's very interesting. Whereas these people seem to be more satisfied, They have more vitality, etc. Right? And so again, this kind of touches upon or connects with the previous lecture in the way that it's not by acquiring external things in which we're going to actually change our life or be happy, right? It is by actually beginning to change ourselves. And also, there's a distinction here, or there's a gap that separates these two, which is two psychological aspects, okay? One is altruism, and the other one is greed, okay? One of the difference, my way of explaining it is altruism is when someone has this yearning to want to create a better world, and the person that's under the influence of greed does want a better world, but we want it for ourselves or for our loved ones, right? And so there's a big difference. This is like unconditional love, and this is like conditional love, or love being conditioned by our psychology, right? And so what all of the different spiritual traditions, and including Gnosis, propose is that when we begin to lean more towards altruistic, ethical principles, we actually become happier, and we bring happiness to others, right? So don't focus so much on becoming rich and powerful so that you can help others. Do it right now as you grow. And don't focus too much on this, because that's not what's going to make you happy, right? And so there is this concept of being internally poor or internally rich, right? And there have been many quotes about this whole concept. This is why Eckhart Tolle says, even if some people have great material wealth, they're actually very poor because they have not found their true wealth, which is deep within you, right? This is why we have, unfortunately, many people that are rich and powerful, but they're also very depressed, they're also very sad, and they end up committing suicide, right? And this is why Samuel Weor says, whoever is internally rich is incapable of exploding his fellow man. He is incapable of stealing and lying. Whoever is internally wealthy has found happiness, right? And so it's an invitation for us to begin to look into those things. And there's a meditation here in which Samuel Weor invites us to reflect on this threshold. He says, there is a fine line where need ends and greed begins, right? So it is undisputable that we all need money, right? We all need a house. We all need clothing. We all need food, right? But then he says, until what point does those things become or stop being a necessity, and now you go over the edge? And
capitalism has no top to it.
Right.
So it's hard, it slips in there, because it's like the standard is motivated by greed, just the standard.
Right.
And we're not talking about rich, which is like hyper greedy. So it's like the baselines are all...
Right, so the concepts upon which we have created the society are a little flawed, or at least the modern society, right? And so we find ourselves in something that Samuel Weor teaches here. He says we need to comprehend in depth the true nature of sensation and satisfaction, okay? Because most of us tend to confuse pleasure for happiness, okay? And this is one of the biggest mistakes that we can ever make, okay? And so let's explore this concept of sensation and satisfaction. In this study, they found that the people on this side of the aisle usually find themselves in something called the hedonic treadmill, okay? Which is basically adaptation and conformity. So how does that work? You buy a $12,000 car, which takes you from your job to your house, right? It allows you to do the things that you need to do. But then you see that your neighbor has a $20,000 car, and it has, I don't know, a sunroof and some power windows, and all of these interesting new gadgets, right? So you say, huh, I want that. So now you stop from needing your car, or you're going from using your car or seeing your car for what it is. Something that allows you to get from point A to point B, right? So that you can get money, to buy the things that you need, like food. And now you begin to cross that line and say, no, maybe I should just get this car. I should get a big SUV, a Cadillac. I can fit all my friends in there, right? Put DVDs in the back when nobody's watching. But because you're chasing this idea when you get that, oh, that's when I'm going to be happy. And so you go with it, you buy your $20,000 car, and then you're in your $20,000 car, and it feels good for about 3 months. And then after 3 months, what happens? You're like, okay, you're used to it. It doesn't feel the same getting in that car 3 months after you bought the car than when you first purchased the car, right? And the same thing can happen with everything. We take this psychology into everything that we do, and so we try to find happiness where? In money. So when I make a certain amount of money a week, that's when I'm going to be happy, right? Or when I have a certain car, when I have this, when I have that, when I find the perfect person, my other half. And of course, we also have a list of things that other person needs to have, right? And then, or we try to find it in love and sexuality and all of the things, right? And so we begin to have this idea that more means obviously more happiness, right? But again, more studies keep showing that that's not really the way to go about it, okay? And so Samuel and Veur invites us to reflect in precisely that. Where can you find in your life, in this moment, that your needs end and your greed begins? Because a lot of the times we sacrifice our happiness, truly chasing happiness, which is very odd. For instance, you have a job, you have a house, you have a family, and you're comfortable and you're happy and you have time, right? But then you say, no, I need a bigger house because that's going to make me more happy. And so now you get a part-time job, and now you're working all the time and you have no time to spend with your family, with your kids, or to even do the things that you like. And so now you find yourself leaving your state of happiness to find more happiness, so we become greedy at happiness. We want more.
Artificial
more
happiness.
Right.
You're chasing artificial happiness versus true happiness.
But we don't know that. We think that we are actually going to get to be more happy when we get more things, right? So anyway, so that's something that all of the different traditions have always said. The problem with that is that it will never end. This is why in Buddhism they say that desire is a double-edged sword. Desire is, they say because of desire, all of the gods fell from their places, from their thrones. Okay? Not that desire is bad, but it's how do we relate to that force, right? When we allow that force to completely take us, then we lose ourselves, right? And so all of the things that we experience give us sensations, okay? So anything that we experience with our five senses, right? Whatever I'm saying to you, you are sensing, and that is creating a sensation. When I say something that you agree with, you like that, and there's a sensation of joy that arises. If I say something that you don't agree with, you feel a sensation that makes you feel uneasy, right? And so, again, the example of the car. When you buy that new car, you have this sensation, right? And then you get, okay, so it's about getting new things. So then you try to get new and new, and every time that you get something new, you experience this sensation and it feels good. You're like, okay. And so then we become like addicted, right, to things. Because why? Because they provide certain sensations. It's not even it's not even about the actual thing itself. It's the sensation that it provides, and that's why we become so addicted to that, right? So you can begin to see how it doesn't really matter what it is that you have. It's all how you relate to things. It's all how you interpret things, how you take them, because that will give you this sensation. And so in the same way that there are external sensations, we also have internal sensations. We also have internal senses. Okay, and this is where spiritual practices come into place. Okay, because we say, of course, you are a human being, and you have these senses, and by nature, you are drawn to things that make you that feel good, and you move away from things that don't feel right, that don't feel good, right? We will try to avoid pain, and we try to move towards pleasure, right? Now, the avoidance of pain and the search for pleasure is not going to give us happiness, but that's another subject. The point is, it's your relationship to the senses. Because you naturally, let's say we are, in a way, also conditioned to look for certain sensations, okay? And so spirituality tells us that that the physical body has sensations, but that the soul, you as a consciousness, you also have other internal, more subtle sensations, okay? And when you begin to practice meditation, prayer, mindfulness, you begin to experience other types of sensations in which you begin to notice, oh, that feels good. And I think this is why some of you are back, because when you came here and you experienced a certain state of meditation, you were like, oh, that felt nice, right? And usually you can't experience that state of being in your normal life. And so now you want more of that, right? And so now we desire the spiritual aspect now. And so, it happens both ways. Since we are only focused on just on the external aspect, that's what we're searching. But then at some point in our life, maybe someone says, or you come across this flyer or a meeting or something, and then you begin to notice that, oh, there are also sensations that come from within myself that are also very pleasant. And guess what? I don't need to spend tons of money to actually get back to this state of well-being, of happiness, of joy, etc. Right? So not only is spirituality going to save you a lot of money, but it's also going to save you a lot of time and energy. Okay. Okay, and so there's something that we call impressions. Okay, there are external and internal impression. Okay, so again, an external impression is an impression, or an impression is a pocket of energy that hits your senses, whether it's a sound, it's a taste, it's a touch, right? Smell. All of those things are impressions. Okay, and what happens when an impression enters through the five senses? We begin to interpret and give meaning to that sensation, to that impression, okay? And so the example that I use sometimes is you walk into a room, you smell the perfume of your ex, and all of a sudden you feel either very happy or very angry, right? And let's say, well, actually, for those few seconds, you are in those states, and then you realize, oh no, he or she's not here. But for those few seconds, you were in a completely different reality, right? Because your senses tricked you, right? And so that's another thing about the senses, that they deceive us, right? So we can't really just go along with our five senses to actually experience reality, okay? The senses are not even, they don't even allow us to experience an objective reality. Okay, and that's because of because of psychological states, right? You begin to interpret a sensation, and the first time that you experience something, the first time that you experience a smell, you relate that sensation, bless you. Okay, no second one. The first time that you experience a sensation, you say, oh, okay, that's nice or that's not nice. That's pleasurable or that's painful, right? And then you what's the word? Categorize it, right? Boom. And so you attach a feeling to that impression. And so the next time that you smell that or you see that or you touch that, whatever it is, then you go back to that first state of being, right? And so then you begin to condition your life over and over and over again. And so, I mean, it's kind of endless how many things we are conditioned by, how many impressions we've been conditioned by. And this is the whole point of psychology, right? When people have traumas, when people have traumas, or there's another word that they use, complexes. It's because at some point in their, usually in their early childhood, they experienced something and then they created a story about it or a negative connotation about it. And now every time that they come in touch with that, it triggers that same reaction or that same emotional state, right? And so we begin to condition ourselves with so many things. And so one of the points of spirituality is to help you liberate yourself from all of those things and to begin to see the world in an objective way, not in the way that you conditioned yourself or that culture conditioned you to see it, right? If someone waves an American flag here, it's perfectly fine. If you wave it in another country, they're going to be like, what's up with this guy? Or if you wave it in the Middle East, they're probably not going to be too fond of it, right? Same flag, same event, different reactions in different places. Why? Because different concepts about it, right? And, we can go on into religion, for instance. This is why people have a certain impression of this religion, and then when they see another religion, they see it as a conflict, right? And so forth. And then everyone's battling against each other, when the whole purpose of both of those religions was to tell them, love each other. You're the same, But anyway, it is because we take an impression, we interpret it, right? And then we go based off of that. So after that point, we can say that we have a subjective experience of reality whenever we receive that impression. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, cool. So, all right, so that basically is the essence of this lecture. And it's an invitation for us to begin to reflect on this concept and to begin to see how I can simplify my life. They say that one of the keys to success and to happiness is in simplicity. How can I simplify my life in a way that it doesn't distract me from what's important, right? And so again, the essence is that happiness is already within you, okay? And we unconsciously get ourselves out of that state, okay? And so whenever you find yourself being upset, being depressed, being angry because something happened that it didn't happen as you thought it would happen, right? Your expectations weren't met, then you reflect on and say, okay, well, so what? That's actually my personal mantra, by the way. So what? Something happens, okay, so what? Just think about this. So what? Why do I have to get upset about it? Oh, because, this person came here and insulted you. Okay, so what? So this person came and told me something, right? And the story of, there's a perfect story. The Buddha is meditating, and there's this guy that's walking along and comes and starts insulting the Buddha, calling him names and telling him, you're wrong, you're a phony, you're not a master, whatever. And the Buddha is just there meditating. All of a sudden, after a while, the Buddha opens his eyes and he says, brother, if you bring a present to someone and that person doesn't accept your present, who does the present belong to? Right? And the guy said, well, obviously to the person that brought it. He said, yeah, well, take your present, I don't want it. And then he went back to meditation, So if we take this practical example to every circumstance in our life, we're going to be walking around like a Buddha in a big cloud, and we're going to be very happy beings. But no, we take everything that people give us, and we take it and we bring it into our heart and say, he said this, she said this, you know? So we take everything personal. But no one told us, you don't have to take everything that, you know? Someone comes to your house and they drop a bag that you don't want, and you say, hey, no, take this away from here, you know, I don't want it. But we do allow people to dump things in ourselves, and then we keep them, you know? And so, I guess the message is, you don't have to keep everything that people dump. And it's hard though. It requires practice, obviously, you know. But again, the more that you practice meditation, the more that you practice mindfulness, the more that you make an effort to go back to that, to go back and connect with that essential nature of being peace, of being serene, the stronger that stays within you. Okay, and then you begin to realize, okay, well, in this circumstance, you begin to see that you begin to react different, or not react at all. You're just, something happens, and you're still okay with it, right? And then something bigger will happen, and you'll fall back and like, okay, now I have to train myself to go back there again. So we go back to the levels of being, right? So you reach one level of being, and there is always another level of being right above that, right above that, right above that, right? And so the path never ends, really. But it's always fun to start it and to be on it. Okay, do you guys have any questions or comments?
I thought it was really interesting about what you said, you know, how, you know, we're conditioned. And like, I mean, it's just interesting to see how the world is conditioned. You know, you talked about, you know, religions and like how, you know, we're conditioned that, you know, not like Christianity and Islam, for example, you know, they both preach peace, but you know, we can see it's not the reality. Like that's how the world is conditioned. Just the state of our world.
Right.
You know? Super interesting.
Yeah. And you know, I've always been intrigued by that. But by you know, the example of how, you know, like why cops take so many when something happens, they take many different points of view. You know, they'll ask you, they'll ask you different questions. The same question kind of changed around, you know, and it's interesting to see that every person has a different perspective on what happened, and the event was the same, right? And so, who's right and who's wrong? Only a transcendental state can tell you if you are right or wrong in that moment, right? There is one transcendental truth at all times, but usually we are so trapped in our own concepts and our own perception of the world, and we're not ready, we don't want to give that up to open ourselves to something new, right? To see something new, right? And it's a scary thing, you know, because if I tell, you know, I've told this to some of my family members that are very like Catholic, you know, and I say, well, you know, Jesus was not the only one that taught this. You know, the Buddha also taught you know, this and that, or Krishna also taught this and that, and so they're like, what? Well, first of all, they just don't know, you know, that, you know, different religions are teaching the same thing, or they didn't even know that this person said it before. I was like, yeah, you know that something that Jesus said, the Buddha said like 600 years before that. What? Now that's the devil making all of those things up. You know, the devil rewrote history, and so forth, right? Because, okay, so maybe the Buddha said that 600 years ago. What does that imply? That implies that you have to now give up your religion or give up a concept about life that's a part of you. So that means that you have to begin to change yourself. And that's the scary part, right? We're afraid of changing ourselves, and society actually is the one that's telling us, be yourself, never change. You know, even friends tell, oh, you've changed throughout the years. And I say, oh yeah, well, hopefully for good. I definitely don't want to be the same person that I am now. 10 years from now. I want to be better. I want to, you know, take life in a different way, right? But we're so focused on this kind of, and this is another thing, but we think that things are just like stationary, you know, like the chair. It's there and it's not going anywhere, and But the Buddha said everything is in a transitional state. That chair is in a state of decay. All of the molecules in that chair are moving, right? The chair is not the same that it was last week or even 5 minutes ago, but we still perceive it as the same. See, so we have such a like subjective perception of reality, and I know all of you are very different than than last week or a month when I first saw you. But some of us, like for instance, I go back to Colombia sometimes, and some people. I left Colombia when I was 15. I'm 34 years old now, and when I go there, they still think I'm the same. I'm the same person, and it's strange, and I know that they've changed. I know that but they still receive me in the same way that they would the first time that I went back and we did a bunch of crazy stuff, and they still receive me in the same way. Hey, so are we doing this? I'm like, nah, kind of, want to chill and, hey, oh, okay. They're like shocked by it, and that's because, of course, a lot of the people that I left, unfortunately, they're still acting the same way, and we can see that in society, right? There are some social critics that say that we live in a society in which we are not invited to mature. It's almost as if society is trying to create this bubble in which we're all living in an eternal adolescent period. And, getting old, don't think about that. It's stay young. You're only as young as you feel, that kind of thing. It's like, no, what's wrong with actually getting older? Right? Every human being at every stage of their lives has a purpose, a role to play in society. So it's almost like we want to eradicate old people and just stay forever young. That's just delusional. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent there. So let's, cool, yeah, anything in particular that you want to comment on?
In regards to impressions, and like relationships with family, so the bond is an impression between like mother and child.
Is it an impression? You
There's
can
an attachment there, right?
Yeah, you can say that. But then remember that there are external and internal impressions, right? So it's not that like impressions are bad or attachments. Well, attachments are always bad, but impressions are just impressions, and it's what you make of it, right? And so we all have internal expressions of external impressions of love, for instance. That sometimes when you experience something, it triggers a loving, joyful state, right? And sometimes when you experience something, some other things, it triggers the opposite of that, right? And so the important thing is to choose consciously how you relate to that impression, right? Because again, it could be the same. It's one same impression, but you can interpret it. You can relate to it in a different way than someone else, right? When it comes to connection among people, then yeah, there's not only an external impression, but there's also an internal impression, right?
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Wonderful. So let's try to get in touch with that essential nature, okay, through meditation. All right.